Welcome back to the Purpose Pursuit podcast with me, Hannah Miller. Now, today's conversation is one you definitely don't want to miss. I'm joined by the incredibly candid and insightful Emily McDowell, a writer, illustrator, speaker, and entrepreneur who's best known as the founder of Em & Friends. Emily's groundbreaking work included her viral empathy cards, and it's redefined how we communicate around difficult topics like grief, illness, and loss. But Emily's success came at a personal cost. Emily's story is a masterclass in what happens when following your passion goes unchecked, leading to burnout, disconnection, and the need to completely redefine success. Together, Emily and I talk about how even the things we love the most can deplete us if we're not careful, and what it really means to pursue purpose in a way that expands us rather than exhausts us. Fair warning, Emily's humour is as raw and real as her wisdom. There's some colourful language in this one, so consider yourself gently advised. Whether you're running a business, leading a team, or just trying to make a difference in the world, this episode will remind you that it's okay to step back, set boundaries, and rewrite the rules for your own well-being. We've got to do what we love, but not in a way that completely depletes us. So let's jump in. Emily, thank you so much for being on this podcast today. I am so delighted you said yes when I sent you that email. There's a lesson for listeners before we even start that sometimes it's just worth asking because sometimes people say yes. So thank you for being here, Emily. How are you doing today?
Of course, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the invite. I am doing pretty well.
Good. It's an interesting time for you in the States, isn't it?
Oh my goodness. Interesting is one word for it. Yeah, it's been rough.
Yeah, I'm sure it has. And it's a bit of a, I guess it feels like a bit of a roller coaster of what might happen today. Thinking of you all in a really interesting season. But I want to, today, I'd love to talk to you about you and what you do and what you've done before and some of the journey. There is a particular aspect of your story that I think is so interesting. But for context, you had a creative business that came about through your own story. So can you tell people a little bit about why your empathy cards and what you did even existed? Just take us back a little step.
Sure. So when I was 24, I had Hodgkin's lymphoma. And the loneliest, hardest part about the entire experience was not what I thought it was going to be. It wasn't chemo. It wasn't like, worrying that I was going to die. It wasn't losing my hair. It was the loneliness that I felt when people disappeared from my life because they didn't know what to say. Mm. And at the time, I thought that it was about me. I was still really young and no one that I knew had any friend that had gotten sick. It was, maybe a grandparent or something like that. But I didn't realize at the time that not knowing what to say and not knowing how to talk about really difficult things was like a cultural problem. Like it wasn't me. It wasn't because I was not good enough. Right. But I internalized it as like, oh, this is my fault. They don't love me. And that just wasn't true. But the thing that was very true is nobody really knows. Most people, we don't get taught how to show up and how to be present in a difficult conversation when someone is going through major illness or grief or loss or something very hard. And in 2013, I had this greeting card company, and we made cards for real relationships was our thing. And so it was it was honesty, and it was kind of the anti-Hallmark. And this was before a lot of people were doing this. And so I decided that I wanted to make empathy cards, which is our version of sympathy cards, that were an actual honest take on grief, illness, loss, that people could give one another when they really didn't know what to say. Yeah. And they were designed to help the giver feel like, oh my gosh, this is a tool that can really actually help me connect because I want to connect. And a card that just says with sympathy or I'm sorry for your loss doesn't really help me. And they were designed to help the people receiving them actually feel seen and feel loved. And they were the first cards of their kind. There are, I'm happy to say the sympathy category is much better now, in terms of what you can find out there. But at the time, it was just very like, if you had cancer, it was like a joke about getting a free boob job or something that felt like it was written by like a man who got the assignment to write a card about cancer.
Yeah. Ouch.
Or like a, thinking of you, or just like a picture of a flower, or, something that like kind of made you feel like you were already dead. So and people just didn't know what to write in them, and so having it all be on the front of the card in various messages that really represented what people would say if they could think of it, was my goal.
And although you say that space is so much better than it used to be, I think there is still issue around people knowing what to say and how to handle it.
Oh, yeah.
I've got a really close friend has just had a really untimely bereavement, and it's really not an appropriate time for people to say things like, when are you going to get back to normal, or things happen for a reason.
Yeah.
I know that you've even got a card about the whole saying, things happen for a reason. And I think we still perpetuate these things, often not because people are trying to be unkind, which is your point, but they don't know what to say. So they feel like this is the time I need to say something hopeful and optimistic. So I will. And actually it ends up feeling, actually, this is just rubbish at the moment. And I need you to just be able to sit with me in the rubbish. And helping us know how to do that and giving people tools that help them do that well is what your card set out to do and continue to do.
Yes. Yeah, we live in a culture where everything is like a problem to be solved. And so our tendency is to try to solve someone's pain.
Yeah, totally.
And that's where those platitudes come from, right? And like, at least it's this, or look on the bright side, or, just everything happens for a reason, or they're in a better place, or like all of those things are efforts to solve someone's pain. And it's actually knowing what to say is easier than you think, because you don't actually have to solve someone's pain, because you can't.
No.
So it's just be there.
Be there, sit with them. Yeah.
So be willing to hear their experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do I think also sometimes people are willing to do that for a week or two, and then they don't quite know what to do, where it takes a bit longer than that. And they're still saying, this is still really hard. I'm still really hurting. And this is then tricky for people, because we just want to go, oh, come on, let's move on, so to speak. And I think, I've just been talking to my colleague about this, and how there is a slow work to be done when life throws the biggest of curveballs to us, and we will never be the same person again. Pre-cancer Emily, you're a different person post-cancer than you will ever be. I imagine that's how you do. I feel like that post the losses I've experienced in my life. I'm not that person anymore. Those things have added layers and a dimension to who I am, and I can't be the pre those events person anymore.
Yeah, for sure.
So you were, before all of this, always creative and a creative person, and obviously this felt like it started off as what I would call in my work a wonderful example of using your strengths and using your talents and using the person that you have been made to be and solving a problem that the world has got. So it was a great example of those things coming together. And on paper, I imagine it then felt very exciting, didn't it? And it felt
absolutely. It was amazing for the first several years. It was amazing. Yeah.
But then you hit moments of like real growth, didn't you? And you created something that was growing and becoming something probably more than you ever imagined. I don't know whether you set out for that, but it became something you perhaps didn't even imagine. What started to happen? Can you tell us what happened when this thing that you had loved and enjoyed had begun to become a problem? What happened?
Well, for me personally, I just felt my entire existence was about work and was about maintaining the company and maintaining what I'd built and maintaining what my employees had built and doing right by the team and not messing it up and just I was doing like the job of 4 people. I was doing too many people's jobs. We grew very, very, very fast. And I didn't ever take any outside funding. And so I didn't have a board or anything like that. And so we were a different company essentially every 3 months for the first 5 years. And so I felt like I had a tsunami at my back, and I was just running and running and running and running. And eventually I just hit a wall in terms of health, in terms of mental health. Like, it was not sustainable what I was doing, and it had stopped being fun. And it just felt incredibly heavy. And it was like, the bigger we got, I had bought into the dominant patriarchal culture's definition of success, which is like, if it grows, make it bigger. If you can make it bigger, make it bigger. Like, why wouldn't you? Like, success is world domination. Like, like all of that kind of stuff that is actually, in my experience, totally not true. And I just didn't know what I didn't know. And I didn't know that in the long term, in order to just create longevity and sustainability for both myself and the company, I could have kept it smaller. There were lots of things that I could have done, and I don't regret anything that I did, but I just kept saying yes. And the result of saying yes also meant saying no to what my body was telling me, and just overriding my body's needs entirely with my brain, and with the idea that, in order to be successful, or in order to, to do right by my company and these ideas that I had to just go for it, in the biggest possible way. And that ended up just becoming too great of a burden on me to continue in the way that I was doing it.
And if I can pick up on a couple of thoughts from that, I talk to a lot of people who end up in careers that are following their passion. And I would never tell someone, right, don't follow your passion, like do something you hate. I don't think that's the message of this story. Do something that's going to suck the life out of your soul because you don't enjoy it. But there's something around what you're talking about there, is that without boundary, without some sort of mechanisms in place that mean that it stays healthy, it isn't sustainable. And that thing that you've loved can kill you. I work with lots of people who are teachers, who are medics, who are nurses, who are team leaders, and they're doing things that they love, but something's happened that they then feel, perhaps you would describe it similarly, that there was this feeling of almost like being on a treadmill that you can't get off, and there is nothing.
Yes.
You're just going to have to turn the speed up because getting off is just not an option. And I think I read that you had even fantasized about, and I totally know what this, I'm saying, I get this. I'd quite like to just be in some kind of mild coma so I can have a bit of a break. And that is a sign. That is a sign that there is something going on.
Sign.
It's a big sign. It's a big sign that there's a level of burnout there, to use a word that we use all the time. And sometimes, I guess I just want to pay attention to the fact that we can't always feel like we can untangle ourselves. And the entanglement feels like we've just got to press a bit harder. And I imagine before you stepped to a different decision and you took a different route, the tendency is to just, I'll just dig in a bit more, or a quieter day is going to come. When we've done X and Y, that will then go. That's such a lie, isn't it?
Both of those things were constantly true. It was, when we get through this next thing, when we get through this launch, when we get through this trade show, yes. And that's a lie. That's not real. And then, yes, it was just this, like, the solution to everything was to dig in harder. And that was not, in fact, the solution to everything. But that was where, that was where I went. I felt like I had so much responsibility to other people, just there was so much dismantling that would need to happen. Like if I were to one day step down or say, I don't want to do this anymore, it was like I couldn't imagine, how many people I would be letting down, people's livelihoods going away. I had a team at that time of 15. Just how, just like how I could keep holding it all and fall apart. And the answer is you can't.
No.
Yeah.
And did I remember my brother-in-law saying to me probably 20 years ago, Hannah, a quieter day is never coming. Like, as in, if you don't create this and then, it is never going to happen. Nobody's going to create this space for you to have the quieter day. And if your story is when we get through this, then I'll do that. Now, of course, there are seasons that are especially busy, like when you've got a massive project, of course. But when you're on this massive growth trajectory that you were on, that's just going to constantly create exciting opportunities, but problems and stuff and people and issues and what you chose at a point to actually find a different way through. But before you tell us about that, I want to hear you talk about it's okay to say that you're done and this idea of completion rather than quitting. Can you talk to me a little bit more about that? Because I think that's so helpful. Just a bit of context. I often help people in times of transition. So it might be because they have chosen to leave a job, or it might be because they've been at home with their children, or it might be that they're now empty nesters. So they're in another, all these moments of life that we have, post-menopause, retirement, whatever. And sometimes it can feel like when they step off something, it's like a quit, rather than this lovely word, which is completion. And that we don't have to keep maxing something or making it better. People have often said to me, build a bigger team, Hannah. Have people who are consultants who work for you. I'm like, I just don't want to do that. I do want to grow in different ways, but that's not what it looks like for me. So can you talk a bit more about what that's looked like for you and what's the difference between quitting and completion?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, both of our cultures, you're in the UK and I'm in the States, have an idea around quitting that it's that it's weakness, that quitting something is like a version of losing, and that, winners never quit, and grit and like this sort of like tenacity and grit is kind of worshipped above all, in terms of, virtue and characteristics. And so there's often when we want to stop doing something, a sense, especially if it's been a huge part of our lives or a part of our identity or, something that's very meaningful, there's this sense of like, well, if I quit, it means that I suck, or it means that I didn't do the thing I set out to do, or it means that, we also we have this idea culturally that you are supposed to sort of build in your life in a linear way, and that like everything builds on each other. And once you achieve something, you're sort of supposed to, and that's not how growth works. And it's not how life works. And it's also not a helpful way to think about. I mean, it's a really punitive, untrue way to think about growth and change and what is the purpose of a life. And I really like thinking about when I have a knowing that something is not in alignment for me anymore, no matter how much I loved it or it was a big part of me at one point, framing it in the way of I feel complete with this.
Yeah.
That there's a sense of, I am done with the thing. This is a completion, and stepping down is completing something, rather than, oh, I'm quitting and I'm letting people down and I'm letting myself down and I'm all the mythology that goes along with that. Is like, actually, no, you're honoring yourself and you're honoring your own intuition and your own evolution by walking away from something that isn't for you anymore. And that's not quitting. it's completing, it's evolving.
It's really
and
good.
that feels important.
Yeah. In my life, I used to be a teacher for about 10 years or so, and I really loved being a teacher. And sometimes I feel it's really important for me to say that, because if I'm honest, I can feel like the fact that I'm not a teacher anymore means I quit, and it's because I couldn't hack it or because it's too hard. And that actually isn't the story. I did feel complete. I felt like the assignment for me in that space had been completed. And I often talk to people around this idea that your assignment might come to an end, but like obviously the purpose of who you are and the things that you carry and the things that you bring, you're just going to move them into a different assignment. So for you, Emily, that creativity that you've got and that ability to think about how other people feel, you're just moving it into a different assignment rather than feeling permanently beholden to an assignment that you are complete in or you feel it's time to move on from. But it's so even as I was listening to you talk, I was reflecting on my own need to justify in that and wanting to say to people, teaching's amazing. Like, and I do think teaching's amazing, and I would never be one of those people that says, don't be a teacher, don't go into that. Actually, I would think people should be. It's the most amazing job ever. But I'm partly wanting to justify so that I'm not, nobody thinks I just quit teaching because I couldn't hack it. I don't want anyone to think that. And that's just me being honest. In this moment, I'm having a bit of a thought and thinking, probably that feels it a little bit, that I don't want to be tarred with that. How do we, this is a bit of an aside and wasn't really what I was going to talk about, but I'm just interested to hear your thoughts on this. I'm totally with you that it's right for things to come to an end and complete. But sometimes I talk to friends who've got, I've got a 16-year-old, a 19-year-old and a 21-year-old. And some of my friends will talk about how I actually don't feel this about my children. So I'm going to make that clear. There's lots of things that I find challenging, but not this. But some friends will say, I feel like my daughter or I feel like my son hasn't got any resilience. Like they're just letting things knock them over all the time. How do we find a way in between not creating this grit that you've just spoken about that is unhelpful, sticking at things that are toxic and damaging, and not then becoming this caricature of what people talk about when they're saying people are flaky? How do we help that generation that are going to have different issues to our generation? I think we're probably a similar age. How do we help them to not then think that everything's going to feel okay, because sometimes it is just hard? What are your thoughts on that? And I hadn't really thought about this.
Good question. I have twin stepsons who just turned 18.
Okay, so same.
So this is a constant question in our house, is how much friction and challenge and difficulty is important for them to learn resilience. And how much is going to just result in more therapy, and like how much is, because both my fiance and I we grew up in houses where we were sort of feral, we were sort of like left to our own devices and very minimally parented. And that created a lot of resilience in both of us. And it also created a lot of trauma. And so it's like, in the effort to give your children something that's not traumatizing and yet also not make it too easy for them. Like, how do you do that? And I think that, and it's a thing we're constantly negotiating, to be honest. And I think that, for me, part of why I feel, and I'm almost 50 at this point in my life, so able to listen to my intuition and to know when to be able to act accordingly, is because I personally spent so many years like overriding it and knowing what it felt like to just keep going, and I don't know how much of that is actually required in order to be in touch with your intuition. I think it's probably not, but that's my experience. And I think that with them, we try to encourage them to be resilient and to stick with things that are hard.
Mm.
And we put it in the context of, this is a life skill you're learning.
Mm.
Like, this is something that you are going to be faced with a lot of opportunities and challenges in your life. And there are going to be times when you have a bigger goal in mind, or you have something practical that needs to happen. Like, you need money and you need to go to work.
Mm.
And when you're 23, your job is like probably not going to be that fun, because inherently a lot of jobs, most in fact, are not super fun when you're starting out. And that having this, and it's not like that, having the skill to be able to say, here's what I'm doing and here's why I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to put up with this temporary, whatever the resistance or the pain is, in order to keep my eye on a future goal, in order to get somewhere, in order to do something. That, those bigger goals don't just manifest themselves. Like, there is a certain amount of grit and tenacity that you need to have in order to achieve those.
Yeah.
And so really thinking about that, and just like trying to impart into them to really think about that, and to really, to put a decision to not quit something into the bigger context of their lives.
Yeah.
And like, it's like, well, what is this giving me, and what will this give me?
Mm.
And what are the benefits to not quitting this, and then learn the skill? Like, what are the benefits to learning this? And I think that like what happens in like, and it's a very different generational conversation, because I think that most people in my generation, and yours probably too, although you do look younger than me,
only a couple of years,
we have done kind of the opposite, where we were taught from the get that hard work was the only way that you got anything.
Totally.
And that if you worked hard, you would be rewarded. And that, it was a really different time culturally, when we were growing up. And so our lesson is to learn actually how to discern when something isn't working, and to have the courage to figure out what we actually want, and to be able to make that leap into something that feels more aligned for ourselves.
That's really good. I think, again, as I'm listening you talk, there's a couple of things that come to mind. One is that we have this human tendency, I don't mean necessarily as individuals, but collectively, of almost saying, right, go hard, you must work. I used to hear that all the time, Emily, like my parents would say. And to be fair, my parents had both grown up my dad especially, in poverty, and everything that my dad had provided for us as a family was because he had worked really hard for it. So his experience was, nobody gave me anything, and I've worked really hard to get here, and hard work pays off. And there's obviously truth in that statement. Of course, hard work pays off, but it isn't a whole statement. And then we have this, almost like what we do in society is then go wildly over to the other end of the spectrum, and then throw all of that out and think, well, now we're going to just, we'll do completely as we feel. And some people go right the way over here, and then we pay the consequences of that. When actually somewhere between there is that, like you said, you use the word discern. And I think discerning what's necessary in this moment, at this time, with this human, with this personality. What capacity have they got to dig in? What could be actually a teenager or a young adult who's actually got the capacity to dig in and stick at this, and another one where if that's the advice you give them, it might break them. And I think there's this child by child, person by person, situation by situation. And I like what you said. What is this going to, what is the purpose of this painful challenge in the longer run? Because the reality is anything that's worth it has an element of pain in it. Anything that's worth having in your life is uncomfortable, does involve digging in, does involve resilience. But that doesn't mean that we have to then beat ourselves with that as a stick, or go, oh, this is a bit tough, I won't bother. It's why can't we do happy medium a bit more, I think is what I'm trying to reflect on. And I'm just thinking about my own children at times where it's been right for them to complete something. And I remember my middle son, who's really musical, doing exams for his music was just becoming a headache for him and me. And I desperately wanted him to continue because I've got my own baggage around that. And I wanted him to do his grades, and grades felt important. And ultimately, we had to come to a decision where this was just not fun for anybody. And why am I flogging something where he needs to feel free to just be musical without that pressure? And I need to let him live his life, right? He's got to live with that consequence. And when he's 25, he might wish he had. He might not wish he had. But ultimately, that's up to him. And so without going off on a total tangent, it was just interesting. We're unlearning this idea that hard work is everything. And I'm 45, so I'm only a little bit younger than you. And I feel like this year I've made more progress in allowing myself a bit more time to say, actually, I've done enough work today than I've ever made in my life. And I'm just as busy and there's just as much going on, but I'm finally learning some lessons. Whereas another generation are going to have different baggage to unravel and work on. So, and each child and each family and each culture and. But I still think we are in a culture which is bigger is better. Why would you settle and not want to grow more? Why is it, not okay to keep it as an industry that you can do from your own home and so on and so forth? So tell me tell people who don't know the story, what did you do to get from this place of I am, something has got to give? How have you got to where you are now? And tell people a little bit about what it looks like.
Yeah. So in 2017, I made the decision to merge M and Friends, which was then called Emily McDowell Studio, with a larger company called Knock Knock that had been around 10 years longer and was about 4 times our size in revenue. And the founder was a friend, and they were very aligned with us in spirit, and we were both in Los Angeles. And so starting in 2018, we merged the two companies, and most of my staff came over, and we basically just ran 2 brands under one roof. And I became a minority owner in both brands, and I joined the executive team. So there were 4 of us kind of running both brands, running the company. And that was great. And it was also really challenging in a different way. Mergers and merging company cultures and merging different ways of doing things and kind of finding your way through that is pretty hard. And every person that I've ever talked to in my life who's been through a company merger will say the same thing. And I think that we all underestimated how hard it would be. And so it was interesting because in 2018, I was so ready to take my foot off the gas and give up some of the jobs because I was doing marketing. I was doing the job of 3 or 4 people. And so with this merger, a big part of that for me was stepping back from the other areas of the company. I'm not involved in operations anymore, and I'm not involved in marketing, and I'm brilliant. I'm able to focus on the creative and on also being a creative director instead of being the person who executes all our work, creative directing a team to begin to execute the M and Friends work, which up until then had only been me and then one other writer that helped out. And so that piece of it was great. And it was interesting because there were so many other kind of new conflicts that I had not anticipated, or I didn't understand kind of, what even could be a conflict. Right. And so it was deeper into burnout, but in a different way. I still was working as much, and now I was working on, solving different challenges. And so it was, and I just continued to override what I knew that I needed, because I was well, now I've got other people riding on that. Now there's so many other people even riding on this. And so I have to perform even harder, and I have to prove that prove
my worth here,
worth it. And I have to, and that was a couple of really difficult years, and then smoothed out. And in 2019, I was able to spend 6 months in Bali and work remotely. And that was amazing. I had never done anything like that before. And I had gone there on vacation, and everything in my body said, be here. You have to figure out a way to be here.
Right.
Just be here.
Yeah.
And I was still working while I was there, but I was alone. I had like one friend, and I basically just worked and took care of myself. And it was a very privileged thing to be able to do. And it was also just showed me just the tip of the iceberg of like, fuck, I'm burned out. Like I was having autoimmune issues. I was really, everything was painful. I was anxious. My nervous system was just on overdrive. I was in fight or flight all the time. It was, people who saw me at trade shows and things in those years have described it to me as you just looked like a deer in the headlights all the time, even when we were in a conversation. And that was what I felt, and then in 2021, we made the decision to sell the company, both brands. And it was interesting because it was driven by my business partner who had 20 years in, and understandably, she felt like it was time, for her to be done. And at first, I was really opposed to the idea. And I felt really like, oh my gosh, we've kind of finally gotten this figured out, and it's smooth, and it finally feels easy for me. And I'm finally feeling like I can, have some, starting to learn how to have some time for myself and not just be a machine. And now we're going to sell, and like, what does that mean? I'm going to have to reinvent myself. I'm going to have to like figure out a whole new career. It was tough. And during the course of the year that it took to actually sell the company and doing all of the, RFPs back and forth and the due diligence and stuff and finding a buyer, I really came to the understanding that the thing that was keeping me in resistance was not that was not that I wanted to do it. It was just fear of what was on the other side. And that I was feeling, after a decade, pretty complete with writing and illustrating product and greeting. And it was like, I've made 1,000 cards. I've said everything I wanted to say on a card. I like this. I like our team. I don't dislike this, but I also don't feel, it's not what I would choose anymore. Like it's not a spark. It's just now this is a job. This is a job that I care very much about, but it still feels very different than when I started out. Kind of the lights had gone out a little bit on it, and so I really came around to the idea that it was going to be okay. Like that selling was the right thing to do. And it was really just my fear that was keeping me in opposition. And so, and we sold it to Barnes and Noble in 2022. And I've been just finding my way through ever since. I work less than I ever have. And it's not because I made like, fuck you money. You don't get like super rich with a stationery company, just to be clear. Like people think I made like $100 million. And I'm like, no. Like, just to be clear, I made like fuck off for 6 months and then go back to work money. Like, so I did have to reinvent, and I've been doing it really slowly and really intentionally and at a pace that my previous self would have just flogged me for, and been totally judgy and totally like that inner voice from 10 years ago would have been like, oh my God, what are you doing? Like you could be doing so much more. You could be making so much more money. You could be like, more successful. And I just don't subscribe to that framing of anything anymore. For one, like I got that and it actually didn't make me happy.
Yeah.
And my ambition, my relationship to ambition is completely different now. And I think I went through menopause 2 years ago. And I also think that this is related to that transition where I no longer have a desire to work the way I used to. And my ambition is still there, but it's instead of being ambitious in the context of career, I'm ambitious to have a beautiful life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
it's like this.
Yeah.
There's a book called The Second Mountain. I don't know whether you've come across it. And
yeah, I know it.
Yeah. So you're talking about that, aren't you? In a way that some people, people hit it at different points in their life. But this idea of actually my relationship with some of the things that were important to me has changed, and almost the problem comes when that doesn't happen for people and they continually chase first mountain things when it should really be time for second mountain, and they don't make that transition. I think there was something else you said that I thought was so interesting for people to pick up on that I just wanted to highlight as well. So many people I work with, as I said, are thinking about transition. But to listen to you, who've had a track record of, going viral, being on Good Morning America, building a business that really grew, you still had a fear of stepping into the unknown, even though you'd already done it before. And I think sometimes people I talk to think, oh, it's all right for you. You've done X, Y, Z and you've got it behind you. It's still frightening to step out, isn't it?
Oh gosh,
it
is because it's like, right. It was all these fears of like, what if I never find something ever that I'm as good at or that I like as much, as I liked this? And what if this is a mistake? And what if I'm, how could it be possible that I could have success again or whatever? And it's like, and it's so funny because I'm also, I'm a meditator and I've done so much personal work in so many different ways. And so having the skill now to be able to separate myself from that voice and to be the observer of my own mind when it's really important, rather than to get spiraled into those thoughts. It's just, I can sit here and sort of let that voice run itself out, and I can bring compassion to it. Like, oh, sweetheart, you worked so hard and you felt, for me, I grew up also with not any money, with a single mom who was an artist. And so everything was very unsteady. Like we just didn't know where the next money was going to come from. And, like it was, and she really equated money with security and safety, which is what happens when you don't have any.
Of course.
And I did too. And so I learned, my nervous system really learned and held on to the idea that, money and a plan and knowing where things were going to come from, like all of that was how my nervous system was trained to feel safe. And so for me, and I've done so much work on this part too, and it's been the stickiest part actually of all of it. The idea of leaving to do what you don't even know, you don't know what, feels just as scary now as it did then. And well, I won't say that. It feels much less scary now after doing some real work around it. But in 2021, I was terrified of what could happen, what would happen, where would I go, what would this be, blah, 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 like all of it.
And again, yeah, like you say, you've done all the work on yourself to understand yourself better and to be able to see what's going on. And I think that, like, that observer thing is really important. I'm learning increasingly to try and to look at what's going on from that helicopter view of myself and think, what's really going on here? What do you really feel here? Why are you saying yes to this? What's driving this decision? But it doesn't stop those feelings from being there. You're just able to then handle them. So when you're frightened, you're thinking, okay, I know I'm fearful about this. I know historically financial security has really mattered to me. I know that I'm stepping out into the unknown, and it's normal for that to be uncomfortable. And you can call it out rather than it dictating. But I think it's really important for people to hear that growth doesn't mean that you then just don't feel the stuff. You don't have any fear or any worry or any emotion. You still did, and you, Emily, did, and I do. Every time I do something new, I have to process through, what if this fails? What if it doesn't work out? What if? The difference is making a decision to say, well, even if that what if happens, I'm going to kind of go with it anyway, and I'm going to try and step towards what's best for my life. And I know loads of people listening will find that just so unbelievably encouraging, that there isn't a master plan. There's a next step that you take, and you take that with a bit of courage, and then the next step, and then the next step. And none of what you've talked about in your story, again, people think I had a master plan when I started my own business 10 years ago. And I'm like, no, I had a bit of an idea about the next thing I was going to do. I had no idea this, and this was going to happen. And that's so freeing to hear that most of us don't have a master plan. We take a step and a bit more illuminates to us, and then we do that, and then a bit more clarity comes, and so on and so forth.
Yes.
I think what I'd want to say, I mean, you've said so much today, and I'm aware of time, and I think so much of what you've said around understanding what's driving our decision making, and also this idea of we're part of a society that says bigger is better, growth is better, win, do more. I think there's something about stepping back and in what you're talking about and deciding, is this what I want? Is this something that I'm feeling compelled to do? I know sometimes people think they should climb a promotion ladder, but actually it might move them further away from the thing that they love and enjoy by doing that. Is it really the right decision for them? Great if it is, but if it isn't, don't do it. But I wondered whether, and just to kind of close, well, first of all, I do also want you to tell people where they can find out more about you, but closing thought, if you could go back to 2015, what would you want to tell 2015 Emily?
I would tell her to try all of these decisions that she's about to make and all of these opportunities that she's having, to use her body to make those decisions instead of her mind, because my mind had been programmed, and conditioned by culture to say yes to everything and to go for it and say bigger is better. And all I did was just override. And that having that understanding that the body knows, like, that you can actually trust and listen, if you can separate, learn what a yes feels like in your body and what a no feels like.
It's really good. It's really, really good.
And really, when there is a no and when there's a yes, just really paying attention to that and letting that govern your decision making more than what sounds good, or what am I saying yes to because I think I'm supposed to, or I think I should, or even that I've justified in all these different ways. Like, well, this is a great opportunity, and this is a good career thing, and this is going to make X amount of dollars, and this is going to, like, all of those things can be true, but are they right for you? And your body holds the answer to that more than your brain.
I'm with you. I totally agree with that. And it doesn't mean that there aren't good things for us to think through, but when we know we're saying a yes that doesn't feel aligned with our body, we're crossing a personal boundary that actually is going to be very difficult for us in the long run. And especially when you know that your brain is full of shoulds or oughts rather than your own thoughts. That's a really important distinction to make. And I do work with people who say, I'm only in this career because my parents thought this is what I should do. Or there's all sorts of stuff that's kind of programmed their direction. And there are things that mean, yes, it provides the security and whatnot, but they are internally conflicted because they're looking for something else. And your story is full of courage. And I'm sure you didn't always feel like that. And nobody ever does when they're in those moments. But you have made the courageous choice to follow what your life should be looking like. And that's just such a lovely, like, uplifting thing for people to hear. And it's not like the story is without major pain or without heartbreak, or it's not you've got some sort of glittery story to finish it with. The story's still unfolding, right? But the courage has meant that you're more aligned and more at peace than perhaps previous seasons have looked.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Emily, again, I just want to say a huge thank you for responding to somebody totally random from the UK who said, I would love to talk to you, and being so generous to do that. Thank you. And secondly, people will be messaging me when this goes out when it goes out in a month's time, and saying they'd love to know more about you. Where's the best? Well, I'll put it in the show notes, obviously, but can you just say where's the best place for people to go to connect with what you're doing?
My website is emilyonlife.com. And that's like basically everything, like all the ways to work with me, which kind of ebb and flow, depending on what I'm doing. And then, my Substack linked is there. I write a newsletter that, is free most of it is free, and it is really the best way to stay in touch with me because I am pretty much retired from social media. I still have an Instagram account, but the newsletter is really the way to do it. And people also, for what it's worth, people like the newsletter. It's not just, marketing. So, sure. And the newsletter is emilymcdowell.substack.com. But
brilliant.
Emily on Life.
Make sure people can find that.
Yeah.
And have a good read of some of the things that are up there already, which I've read and looked at and listened to on other podcasts. There's one last thing I thought that was interesting. I'm just going to add this as an extra nugget because a lot of my work is personality. You just said I've pretty much retired from social media. And I listened to you on somebody else's podcast. And you were talking about how this multiple amounts of relationships you felt you were developing with the multitudes was hard for you in your personality. And I listened to that and I thought, this is an example of that actually was outside of your strengths and talents. You were having to behave in a way that really wasn't who you were. And some people are great with the multitudes and actually it's life-giving. But for you, it was inauthentic and difficult for you to maintain. And again, you've realized, actually, I don't want to do that. That's not the way I want to do it. I can find other ways of engaging with lots of people, but in a way that feels much more me. And that was just a personality element that I thought was worth noticing, that you'd almost felt,
for sure.
I've got to do it this way, but it didn't suit who you were.
No, and what was complicated about that was that I was very, very good at it.
Totally. You can be good at things you don't love.
I was very good at it. And the Em and Friends at one point had 600,000 followers and, and which was originally my personal account. And now I have a new one that it's like things have gone viral. I mean, so much of my success was due to things going viral on social media again and again and again. And so it was like, oh, I obviously can't stop doing this. And stepping away from it and just really coming to the realization that like, I did this for 7 years and I don't want to do it anymore.
No.
Has been, and that's been fear is like, well, how will I reach people? How will I make money? How will, and I would reach more people and make more money if I did social media for sure. But it's been a trade-off that's been worth it for me so far.
So good. Thank you for that. And thank you for being so honest. It was just something I picked up and thought, we've got to understand the role our own personality plays in our decision making and how difficult that is to think that somebody who wants to do authentic, deep, one-to-one, being pushed into that space and being good at it is a compromise that can just, again, exhaust us, burn us out and just leave us so drained.
Right.
Emily, I'm aware of your time that you've been so gracious and generous with, and just thank you so much for all the nuggets in there. There's nothing like hearing a real and true story to help people see themselves in that and take heart and be equipped for what they're going to do next. So I wish you all the very, very best, Emily. And if you're ever in the UK, come and check me out. I'd love to see you.
Oh, thank you so much. This was so lovely. And I absolutely will do that. Same if you're ever in Portland, Oregon, or the Pacific Northwest.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Take care, Emily.